The sky cracked open as the massive alien fleet descended upon Earth. Each ship in the Xalnor Armada was a towering monument of shimmering metal, with a design that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Their sleek, elongated vessels hovered ominously over every major city. The alien ships emitted a low hum, vibrating through the air as though the very atmosphere was bending under their power. Humans stood frozen, looking up in awe and terror, knowing this was no ordinary visitor. Across the globe, communication networks exploded with the news. Aliens had arrived. Governments scrambled to respond, but their military forces were far too inadequate against the sheer scale of the Xalnor technology. The first response from Earth's leaders came in the form of a united broadcast to the invaders. "We do not seek conflict." The President of the United States spoke to the world and the aliens, his voice shaky but resolute. "We offer peace. We ask you to leave our planet in peace." The alien leader responded with a message that echoed from every corner of Earth, transmitted with a voice both metallic and otherworldly. "This world belongs to us now. Surrender your resources, and we will permit your existence. Resist, and we will obliterate you." Humanity's heart raced as those words sank in. The aliens were not here for diplomacy. Their demands were clear, and their power was unimaginable. Cities like New York, London, Beijing, and Paris were blanketed by the shadows of alien ships as they hovered above, like an executioner's axe ready to fall. The world's leaders turned to their militaries for guidance, but every effort to challenge the alien ships ended in failure. Fighter jets disappeared in flares of light, missiles were swatted away like flies, and ground forces were decimated in seconds. Earth's finest were helpless. Meanwhile, the streets of major cities began to empty. People hurried into their homes, unsure what to do. Fear consumed them, but there was something else in the air, something unexpected. A quiet murmuring began to spread among the people, a simmering tension. As the military stood down and governments faltered, there were whispers of rebellion. Among the chaos, a group of civilians found themselves on the front lines. A high school teacher named Sarah, a former soldier named Jason, and a brilliant hacker named Elias became unlikely heroes. They were among the few who dared to take action. Sarah gathered her students into the basement of their school, not to hide, but to plan. She was no military strategist, but her calm demeanor and ability to think on her feet made her a natural leader. Jason, a veteran who had seen combat but had long since left the army, armed himself and linked up with other survivors. He didn't need advanced alien weaponry to fight. He knew the value of stealth, tactics, and strategy. Elias, a young genius with an affinity for computers, hacked into the city's surveillance systems, feeding critical information to the growing resistance. As the Xalnor began enforcing their dominance, Sarah, Jason, and Elias witnessed something remarkable. Ordinary people, once helpless in the face of the invasion, were starting to fight back. In small pockets across the globe, people were not simply surrendering. They were doing what humanity had always done best, adapting. In the midst of all this, the Xalnor watched with growing curiosity. They had expected fear, submission, and swift compliance. But what they saw instead was defiance, a defiance rooted not in strength or weaponry, but in something far harder to defeat: the will to survive. A spark of resistance had ignited, and the Xalnor were beginning to wonder, could this species, this primitive, seemingly weak race, be more than they thought? The moment the Xalnor realized humanity's resilience had come, quietly and unexpectedly. A war had begun, but the aliens had yet to fully comprehend the enemy they were facing. The next morning, as the sun rose over Earth's cities, the mood was a strange blend of fear and determination. The Xalnor had made their presence known. Cities lay in ruins, and entire military divisions had been obliterated by the sheer might of their advanced technology. Yet, in the shadows of destruction, humanity's defiance began to grow. Across the world, an underground resistance movement began to take shape. The Xalnor had expected Earth's populations to cower, but instead, people began organizing. out of necessity, but also out of sheer will. It was no longer just about survival. It was about showing the invaders that Earth wasn't going down without a fight. In the ruins of New York City, a ragtag group of civilians, led by Sarah, were already formulating a plan. They knew they couldn't win a direct confrontation against the aliens with their superior technology. But that wasn't the point. Jason, with his military training, insisted on guerrilla tactics. "If we can't defeat them head-on, we'll hit them where it hurts," he said, scanning through a map of the city, eyes focused and determined. "We strike at their supply lines, create confusion. We disrupt their systems." Meanwhile, Elias was hard at work in a hidden basement lab, piecing together alien technology. It wasn't much, just a few damaged weapons they had scavenged. But Elias's mind worked quickly, his hacker instincts sharp. After hours of trial and error, he managed to reverse engineer a small alien energy pulse that would temporarily disable their shields. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He sent the data to the rest of the group, knowing they'd have to move fast before the aliens realized what was happening. The first major strike happened just a day later. A group of resistance fighters, using the makeshift devices Elias had crafted, ambushed a small alien scouting party in the heart of the city. The aliens who had been patrolling the streets were caught off guard. Their advanced armor, which had been impervious to Earth's weapons, flickered and then powered down when the pulse devices activated. The humans attacked swiftly, using the element of surprise, and despite the odds, they overpowered the alien scouts. The victory was small, but the message it sent was loud and clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Word of this victory spread quickly across the globe. People began to see that resistance, though dangerous, was possible. The Xalaner, who had expected humanity to crumble, now realized they were dealing with an unpredictable species. The humans didn't have the advanced technology or overwhelming firepower of their enemies, but they had something more dangerous: creativity, resourcefulness, and an unbreakable drive to survive. The alien leadership, initially dismissive of Earth's resistance, was forced to reassess their position. A special division of the Xalaner, skilled in suppressing rebellions, was deployed to deal with the problem. But the more the Xalaner tried to quell the uprising, the more the humans adapted. In London, a group of engineers managed to sabotage an alien energy reactor, causing a massive explosion that disrupted the fleet's power supply for hours. In Paris, a collective of civilians used their knowledge of the local environment to create elaborate traps, leading alien patrols into a web of chaos. The resistance wasn't just growing, it was evolving. For the first time, the Xalaner felt doubt. Their superior technology, once thought invincible, was being outmaneuvered by the ingenuity of a species they had dismissed as primitive. The humans were showing them something unexpected. They could learn, adapt, and fight back in ways the Xalaner hadn't even considered. Back in the Resistance's underground hideout, Sarah, Jason, and Elias sat together, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of computer screens. Elias was busy cracking another piece of alien tech, while Jason was going over battle strategies. "This is just the beginning," Jason said, his voice steady, though his eyes reflected the weight of the challenge ahead. "We've shown them we can hurt them, but we need to keep pushing. The Xalaner won't stop until they think we're completely broken." But Sarah, who had been silent for a moment, looked up with a glint in her eye. "Maybe they don't realize what we really are yet. Maybe they still don't know who we are." And for the first time since the invasion began, the humans realized that the Xalaner had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity's greatest weapon, its resilience. The aliens had underestimated what it meant to be human. As the Xalaner tightened their grip on Earth, expecting humanity's resistance to crumble under the weight of their superior firepower, the true nature of humanity began to emerge. While the aliens were fixated on defeating Earth's military forces, they had failed to recognize the ingenuity that lay dormant in the hearts of ordinary people. Humans were not merely surviving. They were learning, adapting and evolving in ways the Xalnor couldn't have foreseen. In the underground resistance networks, Sarah, Jason, and Elias found themselves at the center of a growing movement. Every day, new groups of civilians, farmers, doctors, engineers, students, joined the cause, eager to contribute whatever they could to the fight. The once scattered efforts had now turned into a coordinated global campaign, fueled by a shared sense of purpose. But there was something even more remarkable happening. Humans were making rapid technological advancements, often using nothing but scraps of alien technology and their own resourcefulness. Elias, the brilliant hacker, had quickly become a key figure in this transformation. He worked tirelessly, piecing together alien tech to create makeshift weapons and gadgets that turned the tide in battle. One of his most significant breakthroughs came when he discovered a way to hack into the Xalnor's communication network. It was a dangerous gambit, but Elias had no choice. If he could intercept their commands and disrupt their coordination, it would give humanity a fighting chance. After weeks of trial and error, he succeeded. He was able to create a virus that could infiltrate the Xalnor's network, shutting down their communication systems for brief moments. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was enough to create confusion within their ranks. Meanwhile, Jason, who had been training civilians in guerrilla tactics, began to notice something astonishing. Even without advanced weaponry, the humans were starting to outsmart the aliens. Their tactics, hit-and-run raids, sabotage, and using the terrain to their advantage, were becoming increasingly effective. Jason marveled at how quickly people had adapted, learning the art of war in the most brutal way possible. It wasn't just the trained soldiers now. It was everyone. From teachers to farmers, every person had something valuable to contribute. The first large-scale success came when a group of engineers managed to reverse engineer one of the aliens' advanced energy shields. By studying the remnants of a downed alien fighter, they discovered a vulnerability in the shield system. It required a specific energy frequency to function properly. By modulating the frequency with human-made technology, they created a device that temporarily disabled the shields, rendering the aliens' powerful weapons useless for brief moments. The Resistance now had a weapon that could level the playing field, if only for a short time. The news of this success spread quickly, fueling the fire of resistance all over the planet. In every corner of the world, people began to take up arms, not necessarily as soldiers, but as defenders of their homes and families. The humans were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their way of life. They had begun to recognize their true strength. It wasn't in their numbers, nor their technology, but in their ability to adapt, innovate, and unite. As the Xalnor began to face increasing setbacks, they started to question what was happening. How could a primitive species, one they had believed was no threat, be evolving so rapidly? They had assumed that after the initial shock and the destruction of Earth's military, humanity would submit. Instead, they were faced with a growing resistance force, one that seemed to learn from every engagement, getting smarter and more efficient with each passing day. The aliens had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Earth's resistance had discovered its greatest weapon, its genius. While the Xalnor were focused on their superior weapons and vast fleets, the humans understood something they didn't. The battle was not just about force. It was about innovation, determination, and the unrelenting drive to fight for survival. The humans had tapped into their hidden potential, and in doing so, they had transformed the very nature of the war. The Xalnor were beginning to realize that they were not just facing an enemy. They were facing a force of nature. And that force had just begun to fight back. The momentum of humanity's resistance surged, and the Xalnor were beginning to feel the weight of their mistake. What had started as a series of isolated skirmishes was quickly transforming into a global uprising. Humans had proven their resilience, and more importantly, their adaptability. The Xalnor, who had anticipated a quick and decisive victory, were now facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. Sarah, Jason, and Elias were at the heart of this transformation. The underground resistance network was expanding rapidly, with new cells springing up in every city, town, and village. Ordinary people from all walks of life were uniting, drawn together by a common cause: survival. They were no longer just fighting for the preservation of their world. They were fighting for the very essence of who they were. Jason, who had spent months training civilians in guerrilla tactics, could now see the fruits of their labor. The people who had once been frightened by the mere idea of confronting the Xalanar were now skilled in hit-and-run tactics, sabotage, and the art of disappearing into the shadows. They knew how to use their environment to their advantage. It was no longer just the soldiers fighting. It was every man, woman, and child who could hold a weapon or build a trap. The humans were taking the war to the aliens on their terms, and the Xalanar were not prepared for it. In the meantime, Ilias had become a legend in his own right. The young hacker had turned the tide in several key battles, cracking the Xalanar's encryption codes, disabling their communication networks, and even reprogramming their weapon systems. The alien fleet, once impenetrable and invincible, was now facing vulnerabilities at every turn. With each new success, the resistance grew bolder, and Elias's reputation spread like wildfire. One of their most daring missions took place in an alien-occupied city center. The resistance had discovered a weakness in the Xalanar's supply lines. If they could destroy a critical energy source that powered a significant portion of the alien fleet's operations, it would cripple their ability to maintain their forces. But the task was perilous. The energy source was located deep within a heavily guarded alien compound. A team of resistance fighters, led by Jason, was selected for the mission. The assault was a risky endeavor, but the humans had learned to improvise. Using Elias's hacking skills to disable the compound's security systems, they were able to infiltrate the area under the cover of darkness. The aliens, still underestimating humanity's ingenuity, had not anticipated such a daring strike. The humans planted explosives on the energy core and made their escape, just as the compound erupted in a blinding explosion. The destruction of the energy source caused a ripple effect across the Xalanar's fleet. Ships faltered, their weapon systems temporarily shutting down, and the invaders were thrown into disarray. The victory sent shockwaves through both the resistance and the alien forces. For the first time, the Xalanar understood that they were no longer the only ones with power. They were now facing an enemy that could strike unpredictably and with devastating consequences. But the victory came at a cost. In the aftermath of the mission, a counterattack from the Xalanar was inevitable. The aliens unleashed their full wrath, deploying wave after wave of advanced assault troops, using their superior firepower to retaliate against the human resistance. Entire cities were wiped out in the blink of an eye, and the death toll skyrocketed. Yet, despite the immense loss, humanity did not break. Instead, the devastation fueled their resolve. The survivors didn't mourn their losses for long. They regrouped, rebuilt, and refocused. They had discovered something in the fire of battle, something that Xalanar could never understand. The more humanity was pushed to the brink, the more determined they became. The Xalanar, with all their might, could destroy buildings and cities, but they could not destroy the heart of humanity. The alien leaders began to realize that their overwhelming force might not be enough to extinguish the flame of resistance. Humanity's spirit, unseen by the invaders, was proving to be their greatest weapon. And as the first wave of counterattacks began to subside, the Xalanar found themselves in uncharted territory. The tipping point had arrived. Earth's resistance had learned to survive, to strike back, and to innovate. The fight was no longer one-sided. Humanity had begun to push back with a force that the aliens couldn't defeat. The Xalanar had started to fear something they hadn't anticipated: the limitless potential of a species that refused to be conquered. The war was no longer just about defeating the invaders. It was about proving to the universe that humanity would never fall. The war had entered a new phase. The Xalanar, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves in the midst of an unexpected struggle. Despite their overwhelming technology and sheer numbers, They were being tested in ways they hadn't anticipated. Every day, the resistance grew bolder, more skilled, and increasingly unified. Humanity's ability to adapt, learn, and innovate had become a force they could no longer ignore. Sarah, Jason, and Elias had become the symbolic leaders of Earth's resistance, not because they wielded advanced weapons or had access to alien technology, but because they represented the heart of the human spirit, the will to survive and fight for what was rightfully theirs. The resistance had moved from isolated attacks to full-fledged campaigns, coordinated across the globe. What started as a fractured network of small groups had now become a well-organized force that could challenge the might of the Xalanor head-on. Jason, ever the strategist, had studied the alien tactics and was beginning to understand their weaknesses. The Xalanor's reliance on their advanced technology had been their greatest strength, but it was also their greatest vulnerability. Their ships were powerful, their weapons deadly, but they were not impervious. Every time the resistance struck, they learned more about how to exploit the cracks in the alien infrastructure. The energy shields, once thought impenetrable, could be disabled for longer periods. Their communications were vulnerable to hacking. The aliens' weapon systems, though far more advanced, could be rerouted and misfired. The next move was the most ambitious yet, a coordinated strike at the heart of the Xalanor's command center, a massive ship that served as both their flagship and their primary communication hub. This ship, the Zorathar, had been the symbol of the Xalanor's dominance over Earth. It was surrounded by layers of defense, heavily guarded and seemingly untouchable. But the humans had something that Xalanor couldn't predict: determination. Sarah, Jason, and Elias began assembling the largest and most diverse group of resistance fighters ever seen. It was a coalition of soldiers, hackers, engineers, medics, and civilians, each with their unique skills and talents. They all had one thing in common: the belief that they could make a difference. Elias worked tirelessly to hack into the alien communications network once again, this time targeting the flagship's internal systems. He had learned much from his previous successes and was ready for this most daring mission. The plan was to infiltrate the Zorathar, disable its shields, and take control of its systems long enough for the ground forces to mount an attack. The task was dangerous beyond measure, and there was no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, Jason led a team of soldiers who had become masters of infiltration. They had spent weeks studying the enemy's ship designs, learning their weak points, and preparing for the assault. It was a race against time. Every moment they delayed the attack, the Xalanor grew more aware of the Resistance's presence and would be ready to strike back with even more devastating force. The Resistance fighters had no illusions about the danger they were facing. The Xalanor would stop at nothing to crush this rebellion. But in every battle, in every skirmish, they had found something unexpected: a deeper well of strength and ingenuity in themselves than they could have imagined. Each loss only made them more determined, each victory more fuel for their fight. The time had come to put everything they had learned into action. The attack on the Zorathar was a high-risk gambit, one that could either turn the tide of the war or end in utter destruction. The forces gathered on the ground knew the odds were against them, but they were no longer afraid. Their enemy, once thought invincible, was beginning to show cracks. The Xalanor might have the firepower, but humanity had something more: an unbreakable will, a collective drive to fight for their future, and a genius for turning the tide in ways the invaders couldn't fathom. As the first wave of human forces moved toward the Zorathar, the entire world watched. The Resistance's success or failure would determine the next chapter of the war, and possibly the fate of Earth itself. But one thing was certain: humanity had made its mark on the Xalanor. The invaders had underestimated the power of the human spirit, and they were about to learn just how costly that mistake would be. The assault on the Zorathar was humanity's most ambitious move yet, and the weight of their decision hung heavy in the air. Earth's resistance had gathered every ounce of strength, knowledge, and ingenuity they could muster for this pivotal strike. The Xalanor had underestimated them at every turn, But now, with their very command center in the crosshairs, they would finally see what humanity was truly capable of. Jason stood at the front of the resistance force, his eyes scanning the terrain as his team prepared for the assault. The Zorathar loomed in the distance, a massive fortress of gleaming alien metal hovering just above Earth's atmosphere. The flagship, a symbol of Salonor dominance, was surrounded by layers of defense, both visible and hidden, but Jason knew the humans had learned how to exploit these vulnerabilities. "Remember your training," Jason said, his voice steady despite the pressure. "We've come this far because we've worked together. Trust your instincts. Trust each other. We fight for Earth, for our families, for our future." The troops nodded, their faces set with resolve. This wasn't just a military mission. It was a fight for survival, a fight for the soul of humanity. In a hidden underground command center, Elias was working furiously, his fingers flying over the console. He had infiltrated the Zorathar's internal systems, and the countdown was now ticking down. A few seconds more, and he would be able to disable the alien flagship shields long enough for the Resistance's ground forces to break through. It was a dangerous gambit, but it was the only way. As Elias worked, the rest of the world held its breath. The news of the assault had spread far and wide, and millions watched as humanity's final strike against the Xalnor began. In cities across the globe, people gathered in makeshift shelters, watching the broadcast, clinging to the hope that this would be the turning point. The stakes had never been higher. 5 seconds, Elias muttered to himself, sweat dripping from his brow. His heart raced as the countdown in his mind matched the clock on the screen. He could feel the pressure mounting. The Xalnor would be aware of their intrusion soon, and the longer it took, the higher the risk of detection. Finally, the signal flashed on the screen. "Shield disable successful." A surge of relief flooded through Elias, but there was no time to celebrate. He quickly sent the command to Jason's team, who were already in position, preparing to breach the Zorathar's defenses. Jason's voice came through his communicator. "We're in position. Opening fire in 10 seconds. The ground forces, armed with makeshift weapons, alien technology, and sheer will, launched their attack. They moved swiftly, utilizing the cover of the planet's natural landscape to remain hidden as they advanced toward the flagship. The air crackled with tension, the Resistance fighters knowing that this moment could either save Earth or cost them everything. Just as the first volley of fire erupted from the ground, the Zorathar's shields flickered and began to fail. It was a moment of triumph. The alien flagship, once impervious to any attack, was now vulnerable. But the victory was short-lived, because the Salonor weren't going to give up without a fight. As the Resistance forces moved closer, the aliens activated their internal security systems, and the skies above the Zorathar filled with laser fire and missiles aimed directly at the advancing humans. Jason, leading the charge, barked orders through the chaos. "Form a perimeter. Keep moving." "Elias, how much time do we have?" Elias's voice crackled over the comms. "You've got 10 minutes before they restore the shields. You have to move fast." Jason nodded, his mind racing. The countdown was on. If they failed to reach the heart of the Zorathar and plant the explosives within 10 minutes, the ship would regain full power, and the assault would end in disaster. The Resistance pressed forward with everything they had, overcoming the Xalnor's defenses one by one. As they breached the outer layers of the flagship, the alien soldiers put up a fierce resistance, but they were no match for the human fighters' relentless will to win. Every step they took was a testament to how far they had come, from terrified civilians to seasoned warriors, fighting not just for survival, but for their place in the universe. As they reached the inner chambers of the Zorathar, Jason and his team planted the explosives, setting the charges with precision. They had done it. The flagship was about to be destroyed. One of the Xalnor's key strongholds would be no more, but they were running out of time. "Get out now," Jason shouted. With the explosion set, the Resistance fighters scrambled to escape as the countdown continued. The Xalnor had been pushed to their breaking point, and this attack would mark a turning point in the war. The resistance wasn't just surviving anymore. They were on the brink of victory. The explosion shook the very air as the Zorathar erupted in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves across the atmosphere. For a brief moment, there was silence, a stillness that hung heavy in the air. Then, the reality of what had just happened hit everyone at once. The flagship, the symbol of the Tsalnar's supremacy, had been destroyed. The humans had done it. But the victory came at a cost. The blast had triggered a massive chain reaction that destabilized the alien fleet's remaining ships. The Tsalnar, desperate to retaliate, launched an all-out counterattack on Earth. Their remaining forces, now in disarray but still formidable, began their descent toward the planet. Thousands of alien ships filled the skies, each brimming with destructive power. The final battle was at hand, and humanity's future was on the line. Sarah stood in the command center, watching as the Resistance's forces rallied to defend Earth's last strongholds. Despite the loss of their flagship, the Tsalnar were far from defeated. Their forces were regrouping, and their relentless pursuit of victory made it clear they would stop at nothing to crush the rebellion. The clock was ticking, and the pressure mounted with each passing minute. "How much time do we have?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with urgency. Jason's voice crackled through the comms. "Not much. They're converging on Earth's orbit. If we don't take them out now, we'll be fighting for every inch of ground on the surface." Elias, his voice steady despite the chaos around him, added, "I've been working on a way to use the Tsalnar's technology against them. If we can disable their fleet's command structure, it'll create confusion. It won't stop the ships, but it'll disrupt their ability to coordinate." "Do it," Sarah said, her eyes hard with determination. "Do whatever you need to. We can't lose this." Elias worked quickly, tapping into the Tsalnar's remaining communication network. His fingers moved with a purpose, piecing together a makeshift virus that could target their command systems. It was a long shot, but it was humanity's only hope. He was determined to give the Resistance a fighting chance, even if it meant sacrificing his safety. Back on the battlefield, Jason led the ground forces into what could only be described as a final stand. The streets of Earth's major cities were filled with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and the chaos of battle. The Tsalnar had brought their full force to bear, but the Resistance was unyielding. Humanity had learned to fight with everything they had, and now was the time to prove it once and for all. Jason's team, backed by thousands of other Resistance fighters, took their positions, preparing for the assault. "Hold your ground," he said. "We are not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every person who's ever lived on this planet. We're fighting for our future." The air was thick with tension. The aliens' fleet loomed overhead, but the human forces didn't falter. Their weapons may have been inferior in technology, but their resolve was unbreakable. Every Resistance fighter knew what was at stake, not just their lives, but the survival of humanity itself. They had already sacrificed so much, but this final battle would determine whether their struggle had been worth it. With a deafening roar, the battle erupted as Tsalnar ships opened fire, unleashing devastating blasts of energy onto the Earth's surface. The Resistance fighters returned fire with everything they had, launching missiles and energy-based weapons that had been reverse-engineered from alien tech. The skies lit up with flashes of light as the two forces collided in a spectacle of destruction. In the heart of the chaos, Elias's virus began to spread through the Tsalnar fleet's communication network. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The alien ships, once perfectly synchronized in their attacks, began to glitch. Orders were scrambled, and ships drifted out of formation. The once unified force of the Tsalnar was beginning to fall into disarray. Jason's team took advantage of the chaos, pushing forward toward a critical communications relay that would allow them to send a final devastating blow to the Tsalnar's control over their fleet. It was a dangerous mission, but it was humanity's last shot at victory. With every step, they were closer to the heart of the enemy's command structure, but the pressure was mounting. Time was running out. As the battle raged on, the resistance realized something incredible. Humanity was not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something far more powerful, their right to exist in a universe that had once believed them to be insignificant. The Xalnor had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they would understand the true power of this species. But the battle was far from over. The final hours of the war had arrived, and the fate of Earth hung in the balance. The final moments of the battle were nothing short of apocalyptic. The skies above Earth were filled with the fiery streaks of alien weapons, and the ground shook with the force of every blast. The resistance was holding strong, but the weight of the Xalnor's last, desperate assault threatened to overwhelm them. Jason's team, advancing toward the heart of the alien fleet's command center, fought through wave after wave of Xalnor forces. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of gunfire and explosions echoed all around them. They were close, so close. Every step forward felt like a lifetime. But they couldn't stop now. The fate of humanity rested in their hands. As they reached the communication relay, Elias's voice crackled through their earpieces. "I've got the signal. The virus is spreading through their systems. They're disoriented, confused, but you've got to hurry. I can't keep it up much longer." Jason didn't hesitate. "We're on our way." The team planted their explosives around the relay, working swiftly as enemy fire rained down from all sides. The Xalnor were panicking, losing their coordinated efforts as their communication systems faltered. The humans had turned the tables. The invaders, so used to being the ones in control, were now scrambling to regain their hold on the battle. And in their confusion, the resistance found their moment. With the explosives set, Jason gave the signal, and his team sprinted for cover. There was no time to waste. The countdown began, and the humans retreated as quickly as they could, narrowly avoiding the alien forces that now found themselves in disarray. The ground trembled again, but this time it wasn't from enemy fire. It was the explosive charge detonating. The communication relay erupted in a violent explosion, sending shockwaves through the heart of the Xalnor fleet. The destruction rippled outward, severing the control the aliens had over their ships. The once organized armada now spun into chaos as their coordination fell apart. Without central leadership, the remaining Xalnor ships were left vulnerable to the relentless onslaught of human fighters. The Xalnor, realizing their strategic advantage had crumbled, began to retreat. The remaining ships, now isolated and unable to communicate effectively, became easy targets for the resistance forces. Humanity had struck a decisive blow, and the alien invaders, once so confident in their victory, found themselves outmatched and outgunned by a species they had never fully understood. But the victory was not without a price. The battle had taken its toll. Many cities were reduced to rubble, and countless lives were lost. Yet, as the last of the Xalnor ships were brought down, and their forces scattered into the void, humanity stood victorious. Back on the ground, Sarah surveyed the aftermath with a somber expression. She had led the charge, but she knew that this victory had come at great cost. As the dust settled, survivors emerged from the wreckage, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. They had done it. They had beaten the Xalnor. The world, though scared and battered, was still alive. Humanity had proven its strength, resilience, and ingenuity. Against an enemy that had underestimated them, they had fought back with everything they had. And they had won. In the days that followed, Earth's resistance fighters regrouped, helping to rebuild what had been destroyed. The global community, once fractured and divided, now found common ground in their shared triumph. The Xalnor's invasion had united humanity in a way that nothing else ever had. But the victory came with a new understanding of what humanity was capable of. They had taken on a force far more advanced than themselves and emerged victorious. They had learned that their true power lay not in their technology or weapons, but in their indomitable will to survive, to protect, and to fight for the future of their world. As the sun rose over the war-torn planet, a new era began. The Xalnor had learned the hard way that humanity was not to be underestimated, and the people of Earth, forever changed by the invasion, knew that they had earned their place in the cosmos. No longer would they be seen as weak or insignificant. They had faced the greatest challenge any species could endure, and they had triumphed. The war was over. Humanity had won, and in the ashes of their victory, they found the hope and strength to rebuild a new world, one that would never forget the price they had paid, or the power they had discovered within themselves.